The deck vibrated against her chest, a deep, resonant thrum that matched the tremor in her own lungs. Salt spray misted the optics. Below, the target, a white cigarette boat, sliced a clean scar across the cobalt blue water, a foaming white rooster tail mocking them. "Target is hot, Gunny! Making 30 knots and climbing!" Corporal Davies yelled over the thump, thump, thump of the Venom's rotors. Gunnery Sergeant Rostova didn't flinch. Her eye was pressed to the spotting scope, the reticle bouncing with the helicopter's vibration, her world compressed to the mathematics of instability. Speed, angle, wave height, lead. The calculations scrolled behind her eyes, fluid and relentless. "He's too fast. We're outside the doctrinal envelope." Davies's voice was tight, high with adrenaline. "Requesting we wave off for aerial denial." The radio crackled, the voice of their platoon commander, Lieutenant Valerius, cutting through the static from the JOC. "Viper 1, you are weapons tight. ROE is positive ID and engine disable only. I repeat, disable only. No kinetic splash on the hull." Rostova ignored the lieutenant. She tracked the target through the trough and the crest of the next wave. There. A 3-second window. "Send it," she ordered, her voice flat, absolute. "Gunny, that's impossible. Send it now." A single deafening crack ripped through the air. The world held its breath, suspended between the rotor wash and the sea. 72 hours earlier, Camp Reptile, Horn of Africa, the smell hit her first. Hops number 9. The sharp, nostalgic bite of gun oil, a scent more comforting to Gunnery Sergeant Elena Rostova than any perfume. It was a smell of control, of variables measured and managed. Here, in the sterile light of the arms room, the universe was simple. Carbon scoring, humidity, windage, spindrift. Everything could be calculated. Her hands moved with an economy born of 15 years. The bolt of the M107 rifle lay disassembled on the oiled cloth, each piece a familiar shape in her peripheral vision. Her focus was on the barrel, driving the cleaning rod through in smooth, precise strokes. 81, 82. The door hissed open, breaking the rhythm. "Gunny?" The voice was new, clipped. It lacked the worn-in familiarity of the vowed. Rostova finished her stroke, 83, before slowly withdrawing the rod and placing it on the bench. She turned. Lieutenant Valerius stood in the doorway, his Marpat uniform still sharp-creased, his rank gleaming aggressively under the fluorescent lights. He was all sharp angles and restless energy, a man who clearly believed authority came from motion. "Sir." Her voice was flat, a contrast to his. Valerius walked in, his boots squeaking on the clean floor. He didn't look at the rifle, he looked at her. "You're Rostova." It wasn't a question. She just waited. The silence stretched, the air thick with the smell of solvent and his scrutiny. He paced, stopping at the workbench, his eyes landing on her data book, the dope data on previous engagement book. It was thick, its cover worn smooth, the pages filled with equations and wind charts written in her own precise, compact script. He picked it up without asking. Rostova's jaw tightened, a small, hard knot of muscle. "This is extensive," Valerius said. He flipped a page. "A lot of non-standard variables here. You factoring in the Coriolis effect for a 900-meter shot?" His tone held a thin veneer of academic curiosity over a solid core of condescension. "Only on Tuesdays, sir," Rostova said, her voice dry. Valerius's smile was a brief, tight snap. "Cute, but these maritime charts." He tapped a page detailing complex solutions for firing from an unstable platform. This is theory, Gunny. It's not doctrine. Wind is non-standard, sir. So is wave chop. She began reassembling the bolt, the click-click of the components sliding together sharp and definitive in the quiet room. Doctrine exists for a reason, Valerius pressed on, ignoring her action. It's the aggregate of lessons learned. It keeps Marines alive. This, he waved the book. This is a science experiment, and we are not scientists. Rostova paused, the bolt carrier in her hand. She looked up, her gray eyes meeting his. They were calm, unsettlingly deep. The math is sound, sir. The math, he repeated, scoffing lightly. He placed the book back on the bench but squared it off, aligning it with the edge, as if correcting her disorder. I reviewed your file. You're sharp, but you're on my team now. And my team runs by the book. We are not running hotshot, high-risk solo ops. We work as a unit. We follow procedure. Am I clear? The implied history, the rumors from her last posting, hung in the air. The word solo was a scalpel. She felt the old, cold tightness in her chest, the familiar chill of having to justify competence to arrogance. She had no energy for it. She only had energy for the work. Rostova slid the bolt into the upper receiver. The heavy, oily schlack of the mechanism seating properly was louder than her response. Yes, sir. Valerius stared at her, clearly expecting more. A defense, an argument. He received only her unwavering, quiet attention. It seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. Good, he said, too sharply. He straightened his cover, a needless adjustment. Carry on. He turned and left, his squeaking boots retreating down the corridor. Rostova stood motionless for a full 10 seconds. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her gaze fell on her data book, which he had left perfectly, offensively aligned. She nudged it back to its original, slightly skewed position. The door hissed open again. This time it was Corporal Davies, her shooter, who poked his head in, eyes wide. Geez, Gunny, Davies whispered, slipping inside. He's intense. Rostova picked up her cleaning rag. He's new. Yeah, but stick to the doctrine? Davies looked troubled. He doesn't know what you can do. You just gonna let him talk to you like that? Rostova began wiping down the rifle's exterior, her movements methodical. The rifle doesn't care who talks, Corporal. It only cares about the math. The air in the Tactical Operations Center was stale, smelling of old coffee, server heat, and the faint dusty canvas of the tent. It was a pocket of refrigerated air in the oppressive African heat, but the chill felt artificial. Rostova sat in the back row, a position of observation. Davies sat beside her, leaning forward, his notebook open, absorbing the energy of his first real HVT briefing. Rostova just watched. Up front, bathed in the blue light of the main screen, the intel officer, a young captain, clicked to the next slide. All right, people, we've got a new priority. ISR has confirmed the location of the primary supplier for the Al-Shabaab cells operating in this sector. This man is moving high-grade manpads components. A pixelated face appeared, grainy, bearded, indistinct. We don't have a name, the captain continued, so we're designating him Ghost. The word hit Rostova like a physical impact. It wasn't a flinch, not an outward gasp. It was a sudden cold vacuum in her lungs. Ghost, the same call sign. Her vision blurred for a half second. The sterile air of the 2C vanished, replaced by the smell of hot, pulverized dust and the acrid tang of cordite. She wasn't in Africa. She was in Helmand. The sun was a white-hot spike, the air thick with screams she couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. A Humvee overturned, flames licking from its engine block. The smell of burning diesel and something else. Something she refused to name. She had had the shot, the math was perfect, but she had waited. "Stand by for authorization," the radio had crackled. "Command is assessing collateral." She had waited, and the ghost had driven his VBIED into the market. "Rostova, are you with us?" She blinked. The burning Humvee dissolved. She was back in the blue light of the Toxie. Lieutenant Valerius was looking at her. The intel captain had paused. "Yes, sir," Rostova said. Her voice was unchanged, a flat monotone. Valerius held her gaze, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes, before turning back to the screen. "Continue, Captain." The captain cleared his throat. "A ghost operates exclusively by sea. He uses a modified cigarette boat. It's fast, low profile, and he runs at night. Intel estimates his transit speed is in excess of 35 knots. A murmur went through the room. Davies let out a low whistle. "That's the problem," the captain said. "He's too fast for our RHIBs to intercept, and the ROE is tight." The screen changed. Red letters. Rules of engagement. 1. PID, positive ID, required. 2. Engine, interdiction only. 3. No kinetic splash on hull. 4. Zero collateral, no loss of life. We are to disable the vessel, Valerius spoke, his voice cutting through the room. Not sink it, not kill the HVT. We need him, and we need the hardware. This is a snatch and grab, but we have to stop the car first. He looked around the tent. This is a sniper interdiction mission. The window is tight. The shot is complex. His eyes settled on Rostova again. Which is why Gunnery Sergeant Rostova's team is primary. Davies stiffened beside her, a flash of pride. Rostova felt nothing, only a cold, heavy certainty. Valerius walked toward them. "You will be operating from a stable platform, one of the pursuit RHIBs. You will match his vector and take the shot when you have PID." He stopped, standing directly in front of her, forcing her to look up. "And to be crystal clear, Gunny." His voice was low, for her and the front row to hear. "Given the ROE, you will be tethered to my authorization for the shot." Rostova's stomach clenched. Tethered. "You will not engage," Valerius continued, his gaze hard. "You will not even chamber a round until I give the explicit weapons-free command. There will be no science experiments. No exceptions." He was using the memory of her past failure, the one he only knew from rumor, as a leash. He was recreating the exact conditions that had led to the disaster in Helmand. Rostova held his gaze. The cold knot in her chest wasn't fear. It was ice. "Copy, sir," she said. The silence that followed was her only protest. The simulator room was cold, the air scrubbed clean and recycled. It smelled of plastic and ozone. Davies was strapped into the mock-up, a RHIB platform that was supposed to mimic the sea, but its movements were rhythmic, predictable, pathetic. Rostova was at the instructor's console, overriding the standard settings. "This is garbage," Rostova muttered, keying in new variables. "This thing moves like a carnival ride." "It's all we got, Gunny," Davies said, his voice tight through the headset. He settled the stock of the simulated M107 into his shoulder. On the wide screen, a digital C bobbed. "I'm inputting my own variables," Rostova said. "I'm slaving the platform's gimbal to the wave chop algorithm and adding a 0.02 deviation for engine vibration. It's going to be chaotic, like the real thing." "Copy," Davies said, his voice less certain. "Target acquired," Rostova said, launching the program. A low-polygon speedboat zipped across the screen. Track and engage on my mark. She watched Davies's breathing on her monitor. Steady. Good. Mark. The simulated shot cracked. The screen flashed. Miss range 1100 men. Too much lead, Davies grunted, working the bolt. Resetting. Target. Mark. Miss trajectory low. I'm overcompensating for the drop, he swore. Again. Target. Mark. Miss wide right. Damn it, Gunny, Davies yelled, pulling his face away from the optic. These variables are impossible. The lead required is outside of anything I've ever seen. The doctrine assumes a stable platform and a target moving at a consistent speed, Rostova said, her voice a low monotone, her eyes on the data. He won't be. Run it again. This is just reinforcing failure, Gunny. How am I supposed to build confidence? Confidence comes from solving the problem, Corporal, not from pretending the problem is easy. Having some issues, Gunny? Lieutenant Valerius's voice sliced through the room. Rostova turned. He was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. He had been watching. The sterile light caught the shine of his rank. Sir, Rostova acknowledged, working the new MIO profile. So I see. Valerius walked over to her console, looking at her screen of custom variables. Wave chop at 1.5 meters? Platform instability at 0.03? You're not setting him up for an interdiction, Gunny. You're setting him up for a court-martial when he hits the hull. I'm setting him up for reality, sir. Valerius's smile was thin. No, you're setting him up for your reality. Let's try it the Marine Corps way, shall we? He reached past her, his hand brushing hers as he grabbed the mouse. Rostova fought the urge to pull her hand back. He clicked, resetting the program. Load program MIO Standard Package 4, he ordered the system. The chaotic sea on the screen settled. The target boat moved in a predictable, straight line. Corporal Davies, Valerius said, his voice full of command confidence. Run the doctrinal solution. One shot. Davies glanced at Rostova, his face a mask of conflict. He saw her blank expression, then turned back to the screen. He breathed. Waited. Mark, he said to himself. The shot cracked. The screen froze. A bright red X appeared over the speedboat's engine. Hit. Engine disabled. A heavy silence filled the room. Davies let out a long, shaky breath, a mixture of relief and something else. Shame. Valerius clapped, a single sharp sound. See? The book works. The book keeps you safe. Good shot, Corporal. He put his hand on Davies's shoulder. Hit the showers. You've earned it. Davies, unstrapping himself, looked back at Rostova. He opened his mouth, but Valerius was already steering him toward the door. You're a good shooter, Davies, Valerius said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial low as they walked out, though Rostova could hear every word. Your gunny is sharp, a real numbers whiz, but she's been in the sand too long. Sometimes she forgets there's a right way and a her way. I need you to focus on the book. The book is what saves your ass when the math gets too complicated. The door hissed shut, leaving Rostova alone in the cold. Her gaze fell on the screen, the frozen image of the perfect shot. A clean, simple, doctrinal lie. She felt the isolation settling around her, heavier than her body armor. She had been sidelined, her authority not just questioned, but actively subverted. Valerius hadn't just undermined her. He had poisoned her shooter. Rostova's hand moved to the console. She deleted the MIO standard package. She reloaded her own impossible algorithm. She stared at the chaotic, pixelated waves. Run it again. she whispered to the empty room. The mess hall at O200 was a pocket of stale, lukewarm air. The lights were dimmed to a yellow, buzzing minimum. Rostova sat alone at a metal table, a chipped ceramic mug in her hands. The coffee was sludge, thick and bitter, but the heat was a grounding sensation. She wasn't drinking it. She was just holding it. She'd been in the arms room for 10 hours, running calculations until the numbers blurred into meaningless sigils. She had found the error in the doctrine. It was simple, stupid, and lethal. The standard tables didn't account for the target's evasive maneuvering. They assumed a straight line. Valerius's perfect shot was a lie. The squeak of a boot on linoleum. "Gunny?" Corporal Davies stood there, looking hesitant, his hands shoved into his pockets. He looked young, scrubbed clean from the shower, and deeply conflicted. Rostova didn't look up. She just stared into the black mirror of her coffee. "You should be asleep, Corporal." I couldn't." He slid into the bench opposite her, the metal legs scraping loudly in the quiet. "Look, Gunny, about the sim." "The lieutenant was right," Rostova said, her voice dead flat. "You hit the shot, the doctrinal shot. It was a clean hit." "Yeah," Davies said, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. It felt good, clean, but it also felt wrong. "I've been running your numbers in my head. They're insane, Gunny, but they feel more real than that video game he had me play." He finally looked at her. "Why are you pushing this?" "Pushing him? That shot in the sim, the one you programmed. It's not just hard, it's not possible. Why are you trying to make me take a shot that can't work?" Rostova's hand tightened on the mug. The ceramic was hot, almost painful. "He called the target Ghost," she said, her voice so low Davies had to lean in. "What? The LT?" "The intel captain, the HVT, call sign Ghost." "Yeah, so?" Rostova raised her eyes. They were a flat, pale gray like a winter sky. "It was the same call sign in Helmand, my last tour." Davies went still. He had heard the rumors. Everyone had. Gunny Rostova, the one from the market incident. "The situation was different," she continued, her gaze fixed on something 1,000 yards past him. "It was a VBIED, not a boat, but the ROE was the same." She ticked the points off on her fingers, her voice a rote whisper. "PID, no collateral, awaited authorization." The taste of the coffee in her mouth turned to ash. She was giving him the weapon, the one that could end her career, right here, if he repeated this. "I had him," she said. "The driver, a clear shot at the engine block, 812 meters. Wind was negligible, the math was perfect. I called it in. Viper 1, I have the solution, requesting weapons free." She took a shaky breath. Command came back. "Stand by." They wanted a doctrinal solution. They wanted the QRF to intercept, to avoid escalation. They wanted to follow the book. Her voice dropped, the words pulling from a place of cold, hard memory. "I had my eye in the scope. I watched him, and I waited. I followed the rules, Davies. I was tethered to authorization." She stopped. She didn't need to say the rest. The images did it for her. The white pickup truck, the crowded market gate, the sudden, silent blossom of orange and black, the thump that reached her a second later. "The math," she whispered, looking back down into her mug, "is always right. But it doesn't wait for permission. The doctrinal solution got 8 Marines killed and 27 civilians, because I followed the rules." The silence in the mess hall was absolute. Davies was pale, his hands flat on the table. He was no longer a subordinate. He was a witness. He finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "So, The LT, he's the book, Rostova said, finally taking a sip. The coffee was cold. And the book is wrong. The book will get you killed. Valerius thinks the doctrine will keep you safe. He's wrong. Only the numbers will. Davies stared at her. The last of his boyish confidence gone, replaced by a dawning, terrifying understanding. He wasn't just her shooter. He was her only ally. So, he said, his voice barely audible. What's the math, Gunny? The real math? Rostova pulled a small, worn notebook from her pocket and slid it across the table. The math says a RHIB is useless. The math says we need a helicopter. The night air was a solid wall of warm, wet salt. The RHIB, rigid-hulled inflatable boat, slammed against the sea, a brutal, bone-jarring punctuation mark between each wave. Rostova was braced, her knees bent, thighs burning with the effort to absorb the shock. She wasn't an operator. She was ballast. The high-pitched whine of the twin outboard engines was a migraine, a constant, shrieking vibration that traveled up from the deck, through her boots, and into her teeth. "Two mics!" the coxswain yelled over the roar. "Target should be dead ahead! 200! "I got nothing!" Davies yelled back, his voice strained. He was wedged into the bow, his spotting scope useless in the spray and chop. "Command, Viper 1. Rostova spoke into her headset, her voice flat, cutting through the chaos. "Platform is unstable. Sea state is 3. We cannot guarantee a clean shot." Lieutenant Valerius's voice crackled in her ear, tinny and impatient from the JOC. "Copy that, Viper 1. But intel says this is our only window. You are a sniper, Gunny. I expect you to make a clean shot." The condescension was a familiar, dull ache. "He thinks this is a rifle range." "Contact! Contact!" the coxswain screamed. "Starboard! 2 o'clock! He's running dark!" Rostova's head snapped right. A shadow, darker than the water, was slicing a parallel line, a low, white-water rooster tail, almost invisible in the dark. Ghost. "I see him!" Davies yelled. "Ranging 1,200 meters, 1150. He's moving, Gunny! He's moving!" "Match his vector!" Rostova ordered the coxswain. The RHIB heeled over, the G-force slamming her against the gunwale. The engines screamed as they tried to keep pace. The target was a ghost, a flicker, disappearing into the troughs of the waves. "Command!" Valerius's voice was tight. "Viper 1, do you have PID?" "Negative!" Rostova yelled, her eye pressed to her own night vision-equipped scope. The reticle was bouncing in an insane 5-foot arc. "The target is... Wait!" The speedboat swerved, giving them a momentary perfect profile against a sliver of moonlight. She saw the silhouette. 2 figures, the high-powered outboard engines. "PID confirmed! PID is confirmed!" "Then take the shot, Gunny!" Valerius's voice was a command. "Viper 1, you are weapons-free. Engage, engage!" Rostova looked. She saw the boat rise on a crest, then slam down into a trough. The hull vanished for 2 seconds, then reappeared. The engine was a blur of motion and spray. The math scrolled behind her eyes. Platform speed, 28 knots. Target speed, 35 knots. Wave height, 1.5 meters. Deviation, 2.3 mils. A 50 cal round would penetrate the engine block. It would also penetrate the fiberglass hull like tissue paper if she missed the block by 3 inches. At this angle, with this chop, the probability of a clean engine hit was 12%. The probability of sinking the vessel and killing the HVT was over 90. It was Afghanistan, the market, the standby order. Only this time, the order was engage. Davies was fighting the rifle. "Gunny, I can't get a lock. The dip is too much." Viper 1, I gave you an order, Valerius shouted. Engage that target now or I will. Rostova saw the boat slam into another wave trough. She saw the ghost in Helmand driving into the market. She made the call. Her thumb hit the transmit button. Her voice was ice. Negative command. No viable shot. Gunny, what? Waving off, Rostova cut him off. I repeat, no viable shot. The risk of hull penetration is 100%. We are RTB. She turned to the coxswain, who was staring at her, wide-eyed, having heard the exchange. Get us out of here. The radio in her ear went silent. A dead, ominous silence. It was louder than the engines. Rostova knew what it meant. Defying a weapons-free order was career suicide. But the vision of the burning Humvee was gone, replaced by the simple, cold clarity of her own numbers. She would not take an uncertain shot. Not again. The RHIB turned, a wide, sweeping arc of failure, heading back to base. Above her, the moon was swallowed by the clouds. She was benched. The word was clinical. Valerius had delivered it in the TOC an hour after their return, his face a mask of cold fury in front of Major Chen, the aviation CO. Gunnery Sergeant Rostova is confined to quarters pending a full review of her failure to follow a direct order. Team Alpha will take the next intercept. So she was here, confined. Her quarters were a metal box, 12 feet by 8, a CLU, containerized living unit, that smelled of industrial paint and faintly of mildew. The air conditioner hummed, fighting a losing battle against the heat radiating from the metal walls. Rostova didn't care. The confinement was a gift. It was silence. For 8 hours, she hadn't moved from the small metal desk. Her laptop was hot, its fan a high-pitched whine. Beside it, her data book lay open, pages filled with new, frantic equations. The room was littered with empty energy drink cans and a half-eaten protein bar. Sleep was a luxury. Food was a distraction. There was only the problem. The RHIB had failed. The doctrine was a lie. Valerius's plan would never work. Why? She ran the simulation again on her laptop, her custom one. Miss, wide, low, miss. Her failure on the RHIB wasn't a failure. It was a confirmation. The variables were too chaotic, the platform too unstable in relation to the target. The boat-to-boat solution was a mathematical impossibility. She rubbed her eyes, the grit of exhaustion scraping under her eyelids. The numbers on the screen swam, blurring into green and black soup. Failure to follow a direct order. The words echoed Valerius's voice. They were the same words from the Helmand Review. She was walking the same path, stepping in her own doomed footprints. If Team Alpha, Valerius's by-the-book team, went out, they would either fail or they would panic, take the doctrinal shot, and sink the target. Either way, Ghost would win, and it would be her fault. Because she had said no, she pushed back from the desk, the chair legs scraping. She paced the small box. 2 steps, turn, 2 steps, turn. What was she missing? The problem wasn't the gun. The problem wasn't the target. The problem was the platform. She stopped. The air conditioner clicked off, plunging the room into a sudden heavy silence. The RHIB, it was too stable. It tried to fight the waves, creating a violent, unpredictable chop. It was a terrible, jerky, unrhythmic platform. What if the answer wasn't to fight the instability? What if the answer was to use it? She sat down, her movements no longer frantic but slow, deliberate. She closed the simulation. She opened a new file, a blank spreadsheet. What if the platform was meant to be unstable? She typed in the baseline variables for a UH-1Y Venom helicopter in a low hover. She added the wind from the rotor wash. She added the barometric pressure change, She added the pendulum effect, the slight rhythmic sway of the aircraft. It was a rhythm, not chaos, a pattern. The numbers she was inputting were insane. They were so far outside of doctrine, they were practically heresy. She was adding the helicopter's own vibration as a dampener against the sea chop, creating a counter-rhythm. Her fingers flew. The math was working. It showed a firing solution, a single needle-thin window of opportunity where the helicopter's sway, the target speed, and the wave pattern would align for exactly 1.4 seconds. It was a shot that was 99% impossible, but her calculations showed a 100% chance of success. She found the error. The doctrine was trying to create a stable land-based shot on an unstable water-based target. It was the wrong equation. The only solution wasn't from a stable platform. It was from a consistently unstable one. A slow, cold smile touched Rostova's lips. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of terrible, absolute clarity. She saw the shot. It wasn't impossible. It was just math. She stood up. She had the solution. Now she just had to get unbenched, steal the mission from Team Alpha, bypass a furious lieutenant, and convince a major to give her a multi-million-dollar helicopter based on math he wouldn't understand. She picked up her data book. Time to go to war. She left the CLU without permission. The confinement was a suggestion she was choosing to ignore. The sun was a physical weight, a white-hot blanket pressing down on the Faube. The air smelled of dust and diesel. She found Davies where she knew he would be, the empty, sweltering rifle range, dry firing at a 1,000-meter target. It was a form of meditation, a way to reclaim control. The click of the firing pin falling on an empty chamber was the only sound. He heard her boots on the gravel. He didn't stop. Click. "I'm benched, Gunny," he said, not looking at her. He worked the bolt, resettled his cheek weld. "Team Alpha is on spin-up. You're not even supposed to be out here. You're gonna get us both in the brig." "They'll fail," Rostova said. It wasn't a guess. It was a statement of fact. She stood behind him, out of his line of sight, a shadow in the heat shimmer. Click. "Doesn't matter," Davies said, his voice tight. The LT said, The book is wrong." She stepped forward and placed her datapad on the shooting mat beside him. He flinched, finally breaking his concentration. "What is this?" he asked, sitting up. "The solution." He looked at the screen. It was filled with a wall of equations, trajectories, and variables he didn't even recognize. Pendulum effect? Rotor wash coefficient? "Gunny, this isn't ballistics. This is astrophysics." "It's math," Rostova said. She pointed to a line of code. "That's the RHIB. That's the failure point. The platform is fighting the sea. It's chaotic." She scrolled to a new page. "This is a UH-1Y. The platform moves with the air. It's a stable rhythmic system. The waves don't matter. The only thing that matters is our rhythm within its rhythm." Davies stared, his face pale under his tan. "You want to take a 1,200-meter shot? At a moving target? From a moving helicopter? A helicopter that's swaying?" "Yes." "That's not a shot, Gunny. That's a miracle." "It's a 1.4-second window," Rostova said, her voice flat. "And you will hit it. The math is sound." Davies looked from the screen to her face. Her eyes were clear, absolutely certain. There was no doubt in them, no fear, just the cold, hard certainty of the numbers. He was terrified. He was terrified of her, of what she was asking. He was terrified of Valerius. "He'll court-martial you," Davies whispered. "And me. for even looking at this. He'll court-martial me anyway, Rostova said, a flicker of dry honesty. He's writing the report right now. Failure to follow. Insubordination. Reckless endangerment for the no call. It doesn't matter what I do next. She looked at him. Her voice didn't plead. It didn't order. It just stated the facts. The mission is going to fail. Team Alpha will miss, or they'll sink the boat. Ghost will be gone. The HVT that we failed to stop in Helmand will win again. All because we followed the rules. She tapped the datapad. Or, we can follow the math. We can end this. The choice is yours, Corporal. She was putting it all on him. The weight of her career. His career. The ghosts of Helmand. It was all there on that hot, dusty range. Davies looked down at his rifle, the safe tool that followed the rules. Then he looked at the datapad, the screen glowing with impossible, heretical numbers. He saw Valerius, all spitshine and loud, angry certainty. And he saw Rostova, quiet, solid, and immovable as a mountain. He let out a shaky breath. He made the choice. Okay, he said, his voice hoarse. Okay, Gunny, I'm with you. I'm on the bird. He shook his head, a wild, terrified energy in his eyes. But how do we even get near a helo? How do we get past the LT? He'll have us arrested before we even see the flight line. Rostova picked up the datapad. She turned, her shadow cutting across him. We don't, she said. He's just a lieutenant. We're going to see the major. The aviation talk was on the flight line. There was no escaping the noise or the smell. The air, even inside, vibrated with the thump-thump of a nearby Black Hawk spooling up, and the sharp, atomized scent of JP-8 jet fuel burned her nostrils. It was a different world from the infantry's quiet, sterile JOC. This was a place of mechanics and physics. Rostova walked in, Davies a half-step behind her, a ghost at her shoulder. Major Chen, the aviation CO, was in a flight suit, unzipped to the chest, drinking a fluorescent yellow energy drink. He was all wiry energy and restless eyes. He looked up from a map as they entered. Gunnery Sergeant Rostova, he said, his voice surprisingly calm. He checked his watch. You've been confined to quarters for 11 hours, which means you are currently in violation of a direct order from your PL. You have about 30 seconds to explain why I shouldn't call the MPs. Davies visibly swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Rostova didn't flinch. Sir, Lieutenant Valerius's plan is going to fail, and I can prove it. She stepped forward, uninvited, and slapped her datapad onto his desk. Permission to use your monitor, sir? Chen's eyebrows went up. He nodded once. Rostova plugged it in. The screen lit up, not with accusations, but with pure mathematics. The RHIB plan failed because the platform is mathematically unsound. It creates chaotic, unpredictable motion. Her finger tapped the screen, showing the failed simulation. Team Alpha will fail for the same reason. They will miss, or they will sink the target. There is no other outcome. And your solution? Chen asked, leaning in. He was a pilot. He understood systems. A helicopter, sir. A UH-1Y. She pulled up the new file, the screen filled with heretical equations. The book says a helo is too unstable. The math says the instability is rhythmic. It's a system. And you can build a firing solution inside a system. She pointed. Pendulum coefficient, rotor wash deviation. I can use the platform's rhythm to counter the C state. It gives us a 1.4-second window, but in that window, it's a 99% probability hit. Chen was silent. He stared at the numbers, his pilot's mind translating the math into motion. This is This is insane, Gunny. It's just math, sir. Major Chen! The door slammed open, hitting the wall with a crack. Lieutenant Valerius stood there, his face a blotchy, furious red. He was vibrating with rage. I knew it. Major, I am ordering you to have this NCO arrested. She is in direct violation of confinement. This is gross insubordination. Rostova's heart was a trip hammer, a wild, frantic bird against her ribs. But her body was stone. She stood at parade rest, her eyes fixed on the major. She did not look at Valerius. She is undermining my command, Valerius shouted, jabbing a finger at her. She is poisoning my NCOs. She is... Lieutenant. Major Chen's voice was quiet, but it cut through Valerius's rage like a scalpel. Shut up. Valerius froze, his mouth half open. Chen never took his eyes off the screen. You're infantry, Lieutenant. You see a problem, you run at it. You see insubordination. He pointed at the screen. I'm a pilot. I see a system. And this is the most brilliant piece of ballistic math I have ever seen. He stood up, walking around the desk. He looked at Valerius, his eyes suddenly cold. Your doctrinal solution failed. You sent them out on a RHIB that was guaranteed to fail. Her plan is better than yours. Sir, the chain of command, the discipline, is secondary to mission success, Chen snapped, which you are actively compromising. He turned to Rostova. It's insane, Gunny, but it's good. He tapped his radio. This is Chen. Stand down, Team Alpha. I'm retasking the mission. Get me a Venom armed. He looked back at Valerius, who was white with shock and humiliation. You're still the PL, Lieutenant. You'll fly this op from the JOC. But the no-go call is hers. The weapons-free call is hers. It's her shot, and you will not interfere. He turned to Rostova. Don't make me regret this, Gunny. I won't, sir, Rostova said. Valerius stared at her. It was a look of pure, undiluted hatred. She had won, she had the mission, and she had just made an enemy who would wait a lifetime to see her fall. The deck of the UH-1Y Venom was a living thing. It didn't slam and chop like the RHIB. It vibrated, a deep, high-frequency thrum that traveled from her boots, up her spine, and settled in her teeth. The roar of the twin turbines and the whump, whump, whump of the blades beating the air into submission was a physical pressure, a fist against her chest. Rostova welcomed it. It was a pattern. It was predictable. It was math. She and Davies were strapped to the deck, sitting on the open plank, their legs hanging out into the rushing 120-knot wind. The world was a blur of dark blue water and the first faint, bruised purple hint of dawn. She glanced at Davies. He was pale, a sickly greenish tint in the glow of the instrument panel. His knuckles were white where he gripped his rifle. He wasn't a door kicker. He was a sniper. This violent airborne chaos was not his sanctuary. He caught her look. He tried to muster a look of confidence, but his jaw was tight with a tremor he couldn't hide. Rostova didn't smile. She didn't offer a word of comfort. That was a language she didn't speak. Instead, she reached over and tapped his knee, hard. When he looked at her hand, she pointed to the small glowing screen of the datapad strapped to her own wrist. She had the firing solution open. The complex, beautiful algorithm. She tapped the final variable, 99%. It wasn't a reassurance. It was a fact. Davies stared at the number for a long moment. He took a deep, shuddering breath of the rotor wash, then nodded. He turned away from her, clicked his comms to the pilot's internal channel, and began running his own pre-shot checks, his voice now slightly more steady. Viper 2 to pilot. Confirming airspeed, confirming altitude. Rostova was satisfied. She had given him the only tool he needed, certainty. Her own headset crackled, switching to the command channel. Viper 1, this is command. Status update. Valerius. His voice was sandpaper in her ear, an element of chaos she had not factored in. Command Viper 1, she responded, her voice flat, pitched just above the wind. Inbound to search grid, eyes on. Copy, Viper 1. Be advised, Team Alpha is on standby as your QRF. A threat, not support. He was reminding her that his real team was ready to clean up her mess. Copy, command. Another 30 seconds of rotor noise. She began to sink into the rhythm, sinking her breath to the pendulum sway of the helicopter. Breathe in on the swing. Breathe out on the return. The radio crackled again. Viper 1! Valerius's voice was sharp, unable to help himself. Confirm you are adhering to doctrinal engagement sequence. You will ID, you will report, and you will await my authorization before you engage. Acknowledge. The static in her ear, the voice of hesitation, the tether. It was the voice from Helmand, the voice that had held her, the voice that had let the ghost drive into the market. It was noise. It was a variable that didn't fit the equation. It would break her focus. It would make Davies hesitate. She would not allow it. Her thumb found the transmit button. She waited for the apex of the helicopter's sway. Command, this is Viper 1, she said, her voice a blade of pure, cold ice. Requesting radio silence until target acquisition. We are entering the high-threat envelope, maintaining comms discipline. There was a long, heavy beat of dead air. She could feel Valerius's fury, an almost physical thing, radiating over the distance. She heard a click, as if he was about to speak, but he was overridden by the professional monotone of the radio operator. Copy, Viper 1. Command is phones on the hook until your call. Good hunting. The channel went quiet. Rostova closed her eyes, just for a second. The wind and the turbines were a roar, but in her head there was perfect, beautiful silence. She felt the rhythm of the aircraft, the pattern. She became the pendulum. She was the math. The pilot's voice, calm and clear on the internal comm, sliced through her focus. Tally-ho, we have contact. Target sighted bearing 090, 5 mics. Rostova opened her eyes. It had begun. I have him. Davies's voice was tight, all business. The tremor was gone, replaced by the honed focus of the sniper. Target is a white cigarette, 2 POB, he's running? Oh, he is running? The venom banked hard, dropping altitude, the pilot skillfully placing them in a high 6 position, just off the target's stern and to the right. The world tilted, the horizon a slanted line of dark blue and bright, emerging orange. Rostova's eye was pressed to her own spotting scope, the gimbaled arm absorbing the worst of the vibration. Her datapad was slaved to the scope. He's not just running, he's zigzagging, she said, her voice a low monotone. He's aware. He's using a preset evasion pattern. He knows we're here. The target on the screen was a white slash of foam, carving chaotic patterns. He's moving faster than the brief, she said. Her fingers were already flying on the datapad, inputting the new, erratic vectors. He's pushing 40 knots. The math is changing. Her carefully constructed 1.4-second window began to flicker on the screen. It was degrading. 1.1s, 0.9s, 0.7s. The solution was dissolving. The helicopter's rhythm was no longer in sync with the target's new, panicked movements. Gunny, the solution is shit. Davies's voice was strained. I can't track this. The lead is jumping all over the place. Hold, Davies. Just track, Rostova commanded. She wasn't looking at the target. She was looking at the pattern of his evasion. He wasn't just running. He was running towards something. He's not just evading, she said, her gut clenching. He's got a destination. Pilot, get me a wider view. What's on his 9 o'clock vector? Scanning, the pilot replied. Shit. I have a radar-neutral contact. Fishing vessel. Looks like a civilian dhow, 5 clicks off his nose. A cold, sick dread washed over Rostova. It was a feeling so familiar, it tasted like ash in her mouth. He's running for the dhow, she said. It wasn't a question. As if on cue, the speedboat stopped its wild zigzag. It straightened, a white arrow aimed directly at the distant dark shape of the dhow, now visible in the growing light. He's making a straight run for it, Davies said, his voice dropping. He's going to use it as a shield. He's not just going to use it, Rostova whispered, the blood draining from her face. It was Afghanistan. It wasn't just a similar situation. It was the same situation, the same choice, a high-value target, a no-kill ROE, and a cluster of civilians he was about to dive into. He's using the market. Her hands were suddenly slick with sweat inside her gloves. The smell of jet fuel vanished, replaced by the hot, chalky dust of Helmand. She could see the white pickup truck. She could hear the standby order in her ear. Viper 1, this is command. Valerius's voice, breaking their radio silence, was a violation. I see that dhow on ISR. You are weapons tight. I repeat, weapons tight. Do not engage. The ROE is red. The order was a hammer blow. The target was 2,000 meters from the dhow, 1-800. She was watching it happen. Again, she was tethered. She was following the rules. And the ghost was about to drive into the market. 1,600 meters to the dhow. The pilot's voice was grim. He'll be inside their radar shadow in 90 seconds. We're out of time, Gunny. Viper 1! Valerius's voice was a shriek in her ear, high with panic and fury. You are weapons tight. That is a civilian vessel. I am ordering you to break contact. Break contact and RTB. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Stand by for authorization. The words were the same. The voice was the same. The smell of dust was in her nose, the heat of the Helmand sun on her skin. She could see the white truck. She could feel the rifle stock, waiting. Stand by. Gunny? Davies's voice was a million miles away. Gunny, we're weapons tight. He said RTB. Rostova's world had compressed to the spotting scope, the target, the dhow, the math. The target wasn't slowing. He wasn't veering. He was on a perfect, straight-line intercept course. No, not an intercept. Her mind, the cold, calculating part that was her, clicked back online. The terror receded, replaced by the pure, cold logic of geometry. He wasn't going to the dhow. He was going past it. He was going to use the dhow's mass to block their line of sight and their radar, and then escape into the open water on the other side. The market wasn't his goal. It was his shield. He's not stopping, she said, her voice a low, rough whisper, almost to herself. Viper 1, I gave you a direct order. Valerius was screaming. Acknowledge! Acknowledge now, or I will have you! Rostova saw it. A new calculation flared on her datapad. Based on his current vector, there was a window. A 4.5-second gap before he reached the safe zone, the point of no return where firing would put the dhow at risk. The math was pure. It was perfect. But the order was RTB. She looked. The white boat. The churning foam. The memory of the white truck. The market. the smell of burning diesel, the ghosts of 8 Marines. Valerius was the voice of that failure, the voice of doctrine, the voice that waited. She would not wait, not again. Her thumb, steady, moved from the transmitter to the small dial on her comms pack. She was tethered to Davies on an internal channel. She was tethered to the pilots. But the command channel, Valerius's channel, was separate. "Gunny, what are you—" Davies started. "Viper 1, Rostova, you will acknowledge." His voice was a distant, tinny squeal. Rostova turned the dial. Valerius vanished. The shriek was gone. There was a sudden, beautiful, profound silence, filled only by the whump of the blades and the wind. She had cut the tether. She was off the book. The silence was a cold, terrifying liberation. Davies looked at her, his eyes wide with stark terror. He had heard his channel go quiet. He knew what she had just done. Rostova turned to him. Her face was calm. It was the calm of the numbers, the calm of absolute certainty. "He's clear," she said. It was not a question. It was a fact. "He's clear for 4 seconds. The math is right." She didn't wait for his reply. She turned back to the scope. "Pilot, hold this vector. Do not deviate." She put her thumb on the internal transmit button, the line open only to her shooter. "Jinx," she said, using his call sign for the first time. "Trust the math. On my mark." This was the moment. The 4.5-second window was open. The deck vibrated against her chest, a deep, resonant thrum that matched the tremor in her own lungs. Salt spray misted the optics, a constant battle against clarity. Below, the target, the white cigarette boat, sliced a clean scar across the cobalt-blue water, a foaming white rooster tail mocking them. 1,000 meters, Rostova called, her voice a flat line of calm in the chaos. "Target is clear. Window is green. Stand by." Gunny, the lead, the math." Davies's breathing was ragged in her ear. He was fighting the rifle, fighting the idea of the shot. He was still seeing the Dow, still hearing the echo of Valerius's weapons tight. "Trust the math, Jinx," she said, her voice dropping, not in volume, but in pitch. It was the sound of bedrock. "Target is hot, Gunny, making 40 knots!" Davies yelled over the thump, thump, thump of the Venom's rotors. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to himself. I can't. He's too fast. We're outside the doctrinal envelope." The phrase hit. Her doctrinal envelope, the box, the book that had gotten 8 Marines killed. The boat was 800 meters from the Dow. The window was closing. 3.0 seconds. Rostova's eye was pressed to the spotting scope, her world compressed to the mathematics of instability. Speed, angle, wave height, lead. The calculations scrolled behind her eyes, fluid and relentless. She saw the target rise on a crest. She saw the engine, exposed. "There. Send it," she ordered. "Gunny, that's impossible." Davies's voice cracked, high with adrenaline and fear. 2.0 seconds. She saw the white pickup in Helmand. She felt the hesitation, the cold prison of obedience. Never again. Her voice cut through his panic, through the rotor wash, through the memory of Valerius's screams. It was not a request. It was an absolution. Send it now. For Rostova, the world held its breath, suspended between the rotor wash and the sea. For Davies, the world vanished. The Dow, the ROE, the screaming lieutenant. All gone. There was only his Gunny's voice, the crosshairs, and the math. He exhaled. His finger, which had been frozen, moved with sudden, practiced smoothness. A single, deafening crack ripped through the air, a sound far sharper and more violent than the turbines. The recoil punched the M107's barrel up, the metallic ting of the massive 50 caliber casing ejecting and hitting the helicopter deck was lost in the wind. The smell of burnt propellant, sharp and clean, cut through the salt. Rostova never blinked. Her eye remained fixed in the scope, tracking the shot. She saw the vapor trail, a faint, momentary ripple in the air, arcing down. It seemed to take an eternity, a lifetime. The boat continued, fast, oblivious. Miss, she thought. The math was... Then a sudden violent spray of white and black erupted from the stern of the speedboat. It wasn't an explosion. It was a disintegration. The engine block, the target of her perfect, impossible equation, vanished, replaced by a plume of steam, oil, and shrapnel. The speedboat's nose pitched up, then slammed down, its momentum dead. It began to wallow in the waves, crippled, dead in the water, 100 meters clear of the civilian dhow. Silence. The only sound was the whump, whump, whump of the blades and the ringing in her ears. Davies was pale, his mouth open, staring. The pilot's voice came over the internal comm, hushed, full of a strange, professional awe. Good God. Hit, hit, hit. Engine is down. Target is dead in the water. Rostova's shoulders, which she hadn't realized were locked tight to her ears, slumped a fraction. She pulled her eye away from the scope. The world rushed back in, the noise, the wind, the cold. She looked at Davies. He was just looking at her, his expression unreadable. She put her thumb back on the transmit dial. She turned it, reopening the channel to command. She did not transmit. She just listened. The channel was silent, ominously silent. The void was terrifying. "Command," the pilot said, his voice now formal. "This is Viper, pilot. Target is disabled. Mission complete." A pause. Then, Valerius's voice. It was not a yell. It was a low, tight, reptilian hiss, shaking with a fury so profound it was almost quiet. "Copy, pilot. RTB." The flight back was a study in silence. The whump, whump, whump of the rotors felt different. On the way out, it had been a frantic, agitating rhythm. Now, it was just a dull, heavy thudding, a sound of grim necessity. The pilot, having confirmed the successful capture of the HVT by the fast boats, had set a direct course for home. Rostova sat, her legs still hanging in the wind, the M107 now secured. The sun was up, a brilliant, hostile white that bleached the blue from the sea and the sky. The air was no longer cool. It was hot, sticky, and tasted of salt and fuel. She felt hollow. There was no elation, no surge of victory. The adrenaline had evaporated, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the gritty, metallic taste of the energy drinks she'd consumed. The ghost of Helmand, the shadow that had lived behind her eyes for 2 years, was gone. But it hadn't been replaced by light. It had just left a void. She felt the weight of the next fight, the one on the ground, the one she had to have with Valerius, the one she had no math for. She glanced at Davies. He was still strapped in, his rifle case across his lap. He was staring out at the sea, but he wasn't seeing it. His face was pale, his skin clammy. He was vibrating, a fine, high-frequency tremor in his hands and jaw. It was the shock, the come-down. He had just existed in a 4.5-second window that had felt like a lifetime, and now he had to return to the real, slow-moving world. He hadn't spoken a word since the shot. Rostova looked away. There was nothing to say. He had to process it. She had to process it. The silence from the command channel was the loudest sound on the aircraft. Valerius's one hissing RTB had been the end of it. No well done, no status, just a dead, ominous void that promised a reckoning. She had won the battle, but the war for her career was just beginning. She had cut him off. She had defied a direct order to RTB. There was no math in the world that could save her from that. She had made her choice. She had traded her rank for the shot. The coastline of the Horn of Africa grew from a thin brown line into the harsh reality of the base. The CLUs, the hangars, the dust. Home. The Venom flared, its nose pitching up, the rotor noise changing as it bled off speed. It settled onto the tarmac with a gentle, controlled bump, a stark contrast to the violence of its mission. The engines began to spool down, the whump slowing to a thwack. 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 Rostova unclipped her harness. The world was suddenly, sickeningly still. She stood, her legs stiff, and began, securing the equipment for transport. Davies did the same, his movements jerky, robotic. They were the last ones off the bird. The pilots were already in a debrief, their flight suits dark with sweat. As they stepped onto the hot tarmac, the heat a physical blow, Davies finally spoke. His voice was a hoarse croak. Rostova stopped, but she didn't turn to look at him. She just waited. I didn't think... He swallowed, the sound raw. I didn't think it was possible. I was outside the envelope. I was scared. He was honest. It was the bravest thing he could have said. You pulled the trigger, Rostova said, her back still to him. You knew, he whispered, a note of awe in his voice. You cut the comms. You knew. How? How did you know? Rostova finally turned. She looked at him. The young, terrified corporal who had followed her into career suicide and come out the other side a veteran. His face was streaked with salt and sweat. She didn't tell him about Helmand. She didn't tell him about the void or the sacrifice. She gave him the only truth she had. The math, Corporal. He stared at her, as if that one-word answer explained everything. Perhaps it did. She turned to walk away. Clean the rifle, top to bottom. I want it spotless. Gunny? She paused. The LT, he said, his voice low. He's waiting. He's at the Tioki with the major. Rostova nodded once. I know. She slung her pack, the weight of it settling on her shoulders, and began the long, hot walk across the tarmac, toward the reckoning. The Tactical Operations Center was a refrigerated tomb. The air was so cold, it felt brittle, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat she had just walked through. It smelled of servers and burned, bitter coffee. Major Chen was at the head of the room, standing, his arms crossed. His face was unreadable. Lieutenant Valerius was to his right, rigid, his jaw so tight a muscle leapt in his cheek. He looked like a man who had swallowed glass. Rostova walked to the center of the room. She did not wait to be told. She removed her cover, tucked it under her belt, and snapped to parade rest. Her eyes were fixed on a point on the far wall, just above Chen's head. She was a statue, coated in a fine layer of salt spray, sweat, and windburn. She smelled of the outside, of jet fuel and the sea. She was an intrusion of messy reality into their sterile, air-conditioned world. For a full minute, no one spoke. The only sound was the high electronic hum of the servers. It was a contest of silence. Valerius broke it. He couldn't help himself. Major, he said, his voice a low, strangled rasp. This is not a debrief. This is a preliminary hearing. Chen didn't move. Go on, Lieutenant. Valerius jabbed a button on the console in front of him. A speaker crackled to life. Viper 1, I am ordering you to break contact. Break contact and RTB. Acknowledge. Valerius's own voice, high and panicked, filled the room. Viper 1, acknowledge! Acknowledge now, or I will have you! Viper 1, Rostova, you will acknowledge! Then, the click. The sudden, absolute silence of the severed channel. Valerius stabbed the button again, cutting the audio. The room's hum seemed deafening in comparison. Textbook insubordination, Major. Valerius spat, his composure finally breaking. Gross, willful, and in a combat zone. She didn't just miss a call. She cut comms. She cut me off. She took a shot in direct violation of a weapons-tight order, endangered a civilian vessel, and succeeded, Major Chen said. The two words hung in the cold air. Valerius stopped, his mouth open. Sir? Succeeded? That is not the point. It is, in fact, the only point, Lieutenant. Chen finally moved. He walked over to the main screen and brought up the after-action report. There was a high-resolution satellite photo, the crippled Speedboat, the undamaged dhow, a safe 100 meters away, the captured HVT, Ghost, kneeling on the deck of a U.S. boat, his hands zip-tied. The HVT is in custody, Chen said, his voice flat. The high-grade manpads components are secure. The intercept was, and I quote the SEAL team leader, surgically precise. No collateral, no casualties. He turned, his gaze falling on Valerius. An hour ago, Team Alpha, your doctrinal team, ran the simulator with the actual data from the target's evasive maneuvers. He looked at Rostova. Your algorithm. Then back to Valerius. They failed the shot 17 times. The 18th time, they sank the dhow. Valerius's face went white. Your doctrinal solution was a failure, Lieutenant, Chen said, his voice quiet, but brutal. Your insistence on the book, your RHIB plan, all of it, it would have failed. Ghost would be gone, and you would be writing reports on why. Sir, the chain of command, discipline, if she is allowed to. Discipline, Chen cut him off, is about results, not methods. You were loud. She was quiet. You followed a book that was wrong. She wrote a new one. He stepped closer to Valerius. You were lucky she was there. You are lucky she didn't listen to you. It was a complete professional annihilation. Chen turned to Rostova. Her expression had not changed. She hadn't smiled. She hadn't shown relief. She had stood, immobile, and accepted the probability of her own destruction. The validation was just another variable, and it was almost anticlimactic. The shot was the victory. The math was the vindication. This was just administration. You're a goddamn cowboy, gunnery sergeant, Chen said, his voice soft. No, sir, Rostova said, her voice rough from the wind. I'm a mathematician. Chen stared at her for a long moment. He saw the exhaustion, the deep, profound stillness. He saw the ghost of Helmand, and he saw that it was gone. He nodded once, sharp, quick motion. Don't you ever cut me off comms again, Gunny. Yes, sir. And you, he said, turning to the hollowed-out Lieutenant Valerius, get out of my tow-sea. Valerius, his face a mask of humiliation, snapped a rigid, trembling salute, spun on his heel, and walked out. Dismissed, Gunny, Chen said. Go clean your rifle. The arms room was exactly as she had left it. It smelled of hops No. 9, solvent, and oiled steel. It was her sanctuary. She had been there for 3 hours, working on the M107. The rifle was completely disassembled on the bench, its massive components laid out in a precise, almost surgical order. She worked with a slow, methodical rhythm, cleaning every speck of carbon, every grain of salt, from the weapon that had been her instrument of heresy. She was not humming. She was not smiling. The hollowness from the flight was still there, but it was no longer a void. It was just space. Quiet. The ghost was gone. The memory of Helmond, of the market, of the white truck. It was all still there. But it was just a memory now. It no longer had weight. It no longer had a voice. She had silenced it, not with an order, but with a number. She had traded her career for the shot, and in doing so, had saved it. She had defied the book, and in doing so had written a new, necessary page. She would never be trusted by men like Valerius. She would always be the cowboy, the heretic. She was fine with that. The math was right. That was all that mattered. The door hissed open, just as it had 72 hours ago. Rostova didn't look up. She continued her work, her hands moving with practiced grace. She heard the scrape of a metal stool on the concrete floor. It was placed opposite her, on the other side of the long workbench. She paused, her hand hovering over the barrel. Corporal Davies sat there. His face was scrubbed clean.